Well, we have a very short session, and backstage we were wondering how to pack in so much in just 20 minutes, but let's quickly start with first up. Ladies and gentlemen, please raise a warm applause for our guests this afternoon. Yamini Iyer, Rukmini Banerjee. But coming down to the moot question of what we are discussing today, and either of you, Yamini, you can start. How do you, somewhere down the line, make sure that inclusivity, equity is a strategy and not possibly an afterthought, philanthropy, charity, which clearly is not visible today? How do we do that?
Thank you so much. I'm really excited that we were having this session in the broader discussion because there is no developed India if you're not taking all of India along the path of development. Let me make my point through an experience that we had about a decade or just a little over a decade ago when my colleagues and I were in partnership with Pratham and the Asar survey involved in a very detailed exercise of expenditure tracking, trying to understand monies that leave Delhi and then are meant to go all the way through the pipeline of the government to be spent in a school in a far, far, far corner. Where does that money go? When does it reach? Does it reach and is it getting spent in the way that it should be? And most of you in this room will have the usual reaction that was in some ways shaped our priors too, that at the ground level, there's enormous amounts of corruption. Money always gets spent on all the wrong things, and that is why we are not able to actually take all of India along on our development trajectory. Well, when we went through this process, we found ourselves in a village in Purnia in Bihar, and it took us a good 2-3 hours to get to this particular school. And the reason it took us 2-3 hours to get to this school was because there was no school building. This was a category in the Excel sheet on which plans and budgets are made, a school called a buildingless school that was operating more or less under a tree, and in a very good way, right? You're not waiting. A school requires a teacher and students and teaching to happen. All three of those conditions were in place. There were students, there was a teacher, action was going on, teaching, learning was happening in some way or form. The biggest problem this school had is that they had received an order from above to use the small amounts of money that was coming into their bank account for school management and expenditure to buy fire extinguishers. This is a school that doesn't have a building. The reason they got this order is because we, in the name of good governance, remove discretion at the last mile of delivery to ensure that somebody sitting in a room like this is going to make some decision. They had made this decision because they wanted to ensure that when midday meals are being cooked in the school, there should be safety and fire equipment. But this school couldn't cook the midday meals because it didn't have a building. So the heart of the problem is that we have a governance structure that is designed in a way that is living the imagination of places and people that are very far away from where the government action is supposed to be. We need to empower our government at the grassroots in ways that monies can be spent in a manner that is responsive to what is needed on the ground. That school would have been better off using the money that they had to buy extra textbooks and perhaps hire one more volunteer to ensure that those students learned. Instead, they were lumped with a fire extinguisher and a UC that ensured that the money for the next year would come. So strong local governments and empowered bureaucracy on the ground is what we need to improve our governance and ensure that all Indians can be along this path of development.
Rukmini, you worked for decades in the world of education. How would you want to add to what Yamini said, where India's most vulnerable don't really fall through the crevices of what we're looking at Viksit Bharat vision?
So I think that in the education sector, you can think of many, many things that need to be done. But I would say if I start with two broad layers. First is every child in school? Beginning, building less or building with fire extinguisher or without. And that number over the last more than 15 years has been very, very high. Now, बच्चे स्कूल जा रहे हैं. I remember this very nice definition from a 3rd or 4th standard class in UP, where in any government school or even regular school, you always write attendance and enrollment on the board. So let's say ki enrollment, which is namankan, is very high. Then I asked the kids to read the next word. I was actually there seeing if they could read. The next word was difficult to read because it means upasthiti, which in 4th or 3rd was tough to read, but some kid read it. So I said, ये उपस्थिति का meaning क्या है? So the kid said कि इसका meaning है कि मेरा नाम school आ गया है. Enrollment का meaning है कि मेरा नाम आ गया है. उपस्थिति का meaning है कि मैं भी आ गया हूँ. So second thing is, if enrollment is very high, all the names are in, am I in? And that number varies a lot across India, but in many states it's also quite high. Third question is, are children learning? And I think we are at the point right now that maybe the first two have been largely taken care of. You must keep an eye on who is attending, because it's likely the kind of kids that you're talking about are not there. But uske upar thoda dhyan dene se the children will come. Now we have to, as a system, figure out how do you help kids learn. And again, I would say last couple of years, especially post-COVID, post-new education policy, you see a big improvement in learning in the younger grades. The kids who have started school after COVID, first, second, third, if you look at our ASR report results, or you look at the National Education Survey, Parak, that bottom, the younger kids are doing much better. So I think you have to think and prioritize, do I want the bottom to come up, or do I want the top to become excellent? And I feel, at least in basic education, there is now a focus to say everybody has to be at a certain level. But I think the discussion as you go higher tends to be on the excellence.
So primary basic education needs to be looked on as infrastructure?
Absolutely, yeah. And now with the new education policy, it starts at age 3, which gives you a 3-year advantage to get ready for what formal school begins. And I think if you can do universal learning in this age group, it will reap a lot of dividends later.
So we have to change our outlook on how we look at primary education.
Absolutely,
it needs to be part of our ready infrastructure and
yeah.
not something that we do on the sidelines of trying to uplift the vulnerable. Yamini, if you'd want to weigh in on this, because we are clearly not there, but what will and what should a grassroots model first look like, where development is concerned?
So let me link my story with what Rukmini just said. If a school has to figure out how to solve this challenge of learning, that is a very localized process which happens in the very tactile experience between the teacher and the student. You cannot, sitting in the state capital or even the district administration, or even for that matter in the panchayat office, know what you need to do in order to ensure that the teacher has the flexibility, the ability, and has all the pedagogical tools that she needs to be able to respond to the variation that she is seeing in the class at the moment in which she is teaching. Yet we have designed our entire education system in a way that responds to the top. So you are not preventing the school from saying, actually I want to get 3 comic books for the children over here to get them to learn how to start reading, or an exciting novel that can encourage them to start reading, or some extra tuition for maths. Instead, I've been told that the 1,000 rupees that is coming into my bank account should be used for some fire extinguisher that I don't actually need. So recognizing that there is a very critical part of governance that happens at the point at which the citizen and the state come together. In the instance of schooling, the students and the teachers come together in ways that empower both the citizen to ask questions and empower the state to be responsive to what the citizen needs in the context of the classroom, empowering the teacher to respond to the variety of learning needs that she is confronting in a classroom. A given classroom will have 3 kids in the first row that are closer to what the curriculum expects, but most of the children at the back are far, far behind, because from the day they enter school, they have they are behind, and the system is not allowing. So empowering to ensure that we govern at the grassroots from the perspective of what the grassroots needs, which means that you have to ensure that local governments have appropriate amounts of funds and appropriate amounts of powers to implement, and that citizens have appropriate amount of information for the accountability cycle to work is really important. Local governments in India, as a percentage of public expenditure, spend the lowest at less than 2% compared to any other country that we know, whether it's China or the US or anywhere else that we want to compare. So that's at the heart of the problem in my view.
You know, the sad part is we just have 9 minutes left on something that we should have at least had an hour of. It's like a rapid fire and trying to put in everything together. But yeah, you want to come in, yes.
Can I add? So Yamini, is talking about money, very important, we all know, but we have 2 kinds of resources, I feel. One is money resources and one is human resources. And I think the answer to your question about what would a citizen-oriented, grassroots, bottom-up approach look like, let me share 3 examples. First is the example from the ASR reports, the Annual Status of Education Report, which has been around since 2005. And the way this report is done, it's to answer the two questions I talked about. Are children in school and are they learning? But done at every rural district. We have facilitated this report for 20 years, and I think it's one of the, I'm saying so myself, it's one of the most productive experiences that we've had. A district level organization, usually a school or a college, does it. And you go to a randomly selected set of villages where you, survey 20 households in a systematic way. What this does is, it creates the data, but it also creates an understanding of the problem by the young people who've gone to do this, as well as in the village where it's being done. So you ask children to read, they actually have to read. You ask it in the sampled households, but the whole village that day is talking about हमारे बच्चों को पढ़ना आता है कि नहीं, क्यों नहीं आता है, and so on. Results are then aggregated at a district level. At the district level, there's a lot of conversation because district is where these plans are made. And then, of course, at the state and the national level. But beginning from the ground upwards, every year for 20 years, every year 20, 30,000 young people being involved in it, I think leads to two things. One is leads to a real understanding of a problem, and then a real discussion of what we should do, and some amount of ownership at the ground as well as block or district level to say this is our problem, how shall we solve it? So that's one. I'll give you one more because I have my eyes on the time as well. The second one is, actually I'm going to give you two very quickly. One is, for example, this summer, looking at our ASR results, we can see that the kids who have joined school after COVID, their learning levels are doing well. For many reasons. But the kids who went this year from 5th to 6th, they actually went quite weak because this is the generation which didn't have first and second. They were during COVID at home during first and second, so their foundations are weak. So one of the things we did, starting at the district level, was to say, is this okay? Should we let our primary school kids go into middle school weak, or is there something that we as ordinary people can do? And we put out a big appeal at a district level. Hundreds and lakhs of high school students helped. Again, I think that is, if you think this is my problem as well, and if I'm part of the solution, we had 6 lakh volunteers across the country, most of them under 20, but who could spend an hour or two helping the younger kids coming into school with basic math and reading. So again, we have human resources. We are a very, very rich country because we have billions of people. If everybody thought I can provide a solution, we wouldn't have it. Third one, which is more structured, Maharashtra government as part of the Nipun mission. Nipun is to get our kids by 3rd grade to be reading and doing math. Lots of things are happening in school, but they believed, like we did, that families can play a big role. So in Maharashtra, for every Zilla Parishad school, there's a group of mothers by mohalla, not even for the village. What they do is, with the government, we send them a little activity to do every week. Something to do that 1st and 2nd standard kids do. They do it in the group, then they do it at home, and then once a month they go to school and the teachers and them do it together. Again, no cost, practically no cost, but adding huge value. So we have to learn how to use our available human resources to help.
You know, you talk about citizen partnership. How do you institutionalize that? Because that's possibly a solution to what we're looking at in terms of, forming a policy where grassroots is concerned. But Yamini, moving a little ahead of just education, when you look at health, when you look at skill development, how do you look at that development first model where grassroots are concerned?
So I think there are two things, right? First, we as a nation have to be willing to recognize that this is where resources need to be allocated. Ultimately, all governments have a limited amount of resources, and the whole process of politics is about determining what should we prioritize. We tend to prioritize our highways, important as they are, but we prioritize our highways over our schools and our health centers. And until that broad social consensus isn't broken, by repeatedly reminding ourselves that there can be no growth if if you don't provide for economic opportunity for all, we will never get where we need to. So resource allocation, putting money where you need to, is the most crucial thing. Now the second question that always comes up is, well, yes, you can put money where you are, but the whole system is so corrupt, nothing actually happens, money doesn't lead to outcomes. that is, that gets us to the second point. How do you actually change the structure of governance in a way that it delivers for what it's meant to be? Right now, we have a structure of governance that is so hierarchical that it's like kind of taking your India plug when you travel to the US and trying to shove it in there. What is required is completely different to what we have. What we need is a government system, a governance structure that is not hierarchical, but actually leverages the human resource power. The fact is that society is mobilized and is seeking a better life and participates any opportunity that we are given. But our mindset is, if you empower the local, there will be corruption in the ground, and we forget that there's corruption upar also. So if we take that away and recognize that empowering the local and finding ways in which the state and society can go together, we have laws that require it. The 73rd and 74th Amendment are precisely that. Every government scheme requires social audits on the ground. We do not implement them because we also say नीचे के level पर सबसे ज़्यादा घूस वहीं पे खाते हैं. Empower the local governments, empower the local bureaucracy, and give them the capability to work with society. You will see huge transformation.
You know, resource allocation is something I think we at Business Today should also look at and should have given a little more time to this session, but which we will do in time to come. But I just have 2 minutes. I'm going to take 2 more minutes on this session, and I'm going to give both of you, time to put your point forward on what you see is the way ahead, because we're looking at what, 2047, and how do we make sure that the most vulnerable keep pace with that dream?
So I would say that we've begun very well after COVID. We are doing what we need to do. We need to do more, but we are trying to build very strong foundations of the kids today who are in the very young grades. If we continue to do that, at least for this lot, by the time to get to 8th, they will have a real chance at fulfilling whatever it is that they want to do next. But what about the kids who are not that young anymore? So I think that the first case I would call a leap forward. We are on the process of leap forward. We must keep the momentum up. This is not something only for schools and educationists to do. We and you particularly, who are powerful people in India, must have faith that this can go forward. The second is, how do I help kids to catch up? You can't have kids leaving 8th standard without having the basic reading, writing, maths skills.
You know, I want to come in, I want you to add to the fact that we were speaking about institutionalizing citizen partnership. How do we do that? Because we speak quite a bit about it.
I think at every level, having the voice, like I said in the Maharashtra case, the voice of the mothers is as important as the voice of the teachers. And when you do things together, these voices develop together. So it's not like, these are two separate pillars of the institution. We have to believe that if we want our kids to go ahead, join hands. We have almost 100% enrollment in this country because parents as well as governments as well as teachers all believe this should happen. Now I think that if we want Viksit Bharat, our kids must have strong foundations and we need to do it together. And my last word, I have 2 seconds, is we must be the most colorful panel today. So I think I'd like to thank you guys for that.
Yamini, go ahead.
In the spirit of color, variation and variety, I think everything that Rukmini has said should be a reminder that ultimately development is a process. To be Viksit is a collective process, and that requires us to ensure that our grassroots democratic institutions are strong and vibrant. Access to, right to information was an extremely important part and parcel of precisely empowering those spaces. We need to ensure that those democratic processes are strengthened, they are allowed to continue. And don't forget, India is great at having the best systems on paper. So we have Gram Sabhas legally mandated, we have social audits legally mandated, we have a right to information. Ultimately, it's about what happens on the ground, where local power dynamics and not so local power dynamics and macro power dynamics ensure that we keep the grassroots as disempowered as we possibly can. This is a fight and it's a struggle. It doesn't happen easily, but recognizing that when society and state work together collectively in an empowered and transparent manner, magic happens. That is a responsibility of all of us as citizens, which we should take away forward with us in every way.
Ladies and gentlemen, please raise a warm applause for our two panelists. In 20 minutes, they've given you a master class on policy and how to keep the most vulnerable alongside as we make to what? The 2047 dream of Viksit Bharat. Thank you, ladies, for joining us. It's been an honor, and hopefully we're going to reconvene and do a larger session later.
Thank you so much, Yami. Thank you so much, Rukmini, for that very thought-provoking session. May I please request you to stay back while I request Siddharth Basu Chatterjee to please come up on stage and present a token of appreciation to both our brilliant speakers.